In this devotional, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts from Judges chapter 2, verses 16 through 23, where I'll ask the question, what happens in the book of Judges? Judges chapter 2, verses 16 through 23 says, "Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who had afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And he said, because this people has transgressed my covenant that I commanded their fathers, and have not obeyed my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did or not. So the Lord left those nations, not driving them out quickly, but he did not give them into the hand of Joshua." Sometimes at the beginning of a book, you get a summary of what the author is trying to say. And that's exactly what happens here in Judges chapter 2. Because what we will find is that over and over again in the period of the Judges, this same order of events takes place. The order of events where a judge is raised. Then the people turn their backs on God. And then the blessing of the Lord is removed. So more enemies come in. And then what happens? The Lord will raise another judge once the people of Israel start begging him for relief from their enemies. Well, here in Judges chapter 2, we see that that whole cycle is written down for us so we get an idea of what's going to take place throughout the entire book of Judges. So here are 3 thoughts from Judges chapter 2, verses 16 through 23, answering the question, what happens in the book of Judges? Thought number 1, judges raised. The Lord raises up judges. And when the Lord raises up a judge, that person is ruling Israel. Sort of like a king, but there's no lineage that goes along with it. It's somebody who is selected by God himself. And then once they are finished or they die, they're no longer the judge, and there's no longer any judge in the land. And when there's no longer any judge in the land, what do the people of Israel do? They start to rebel. But the Lord is faithful in giving them judges. He gives them judges as a means of bringing them back into covenant faithfulness. The Lord gives Israel judges when they are asking for help, because it's the judges who lead them back into proper worship. And it's the proper worship and the proper relationship between Israel and God that ultimately brings about peace. Thought number 2, backs turned. So here's what happens when the cat's away, the mice will play. So whenever the judge dies, whichever judge it is, whenever they die and they're no longer ruling over Israel, all of a sudden, the people start turning back. They start turning back to those detestable practices of the people that they had driven out of the land. They start turning back to the Baals and the Asherah, and they start worshiping these other false gods. And when they do that, they're turning their back on the God who brought them up out of slavery from Egypt. They're turning their backs on the Lord who has saved them from the terrible situation that their forefathers had found themselves in. And this is what happens over and over again. The second they don't have that good, solid leadership, the people rebel. They rebel and they turn back to their wicked ways, and then the Lord begins judgment anew. Thought number 3, blessing removed. So the Lord is blessing the people of Israel. He's blessing them. He's keeping them safe. He's giving them this land. He's driving out the nations before them. But this is his promise that he gives. The promise he gives is that as long as the people of Israel turn their backs on him, he will remove this blessing of keeping the enemies from encroaching upon them. And what we see all throughout the book of Judges is this very thing taking place. The people of Israel will recognize there's no king in the land. They'll recognize there's no judge to help us, to keep us focused on our covenant relationship with God, so they worship false gods. And when they worship false gods, they turn their back on the Lord. The Lord sends enemies in there so he can demonstrate exactly what it is that he has saved them from. Well, here's what happens. The Lord removes this blessing of having driven out the enemies from the land, and he leaves them there. He leaves them there to test Israel. And what we see again and again all throughout the book of Judges is that Israel fails the test. When there's no judge, when there's no one there to guide them, to lead them in faithfulness to the Lord, the people of Israel inevitably rebel against God and find out just how much he has been protecting them. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Judges chapters 1 through 6. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.